Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, all around the world. We are UnitedWeStrike.com, Peace Train Marathons 2012. This is Humanity Transcending, and I am your host, Siobhan Cerisi, coming at you from New York, Suffolk County, Long Island. It is 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and I welcome everybody, welcome all the listeners. I have a really great show for you tonight. I have a guest that I'm very happy to know. I'm very excited to hear from. Before I get into that, I just want to put out two invitations. I'll do it at the beginning of the show and at the end of the show. As you know, I'm a member of Long Island Skywatch. We had historic public hearings here December 6th, where for 2 hours straight, 20 people gave testimony to the legislature on geoengineering, also known as weather modification, also known as chemtrails, also known as solar radiation management, geoengineering. Goes by a lot of names. But we're making headway here in Suffolk County. The legislature can never go back to not knowing what's going on. I met Anthony Tolda, actually my guest, at the public hearings. He came to support the bill that was in place to ban certain chemicals associated with geoengineering. So he is an aware individual. Actually, you know what? Let's get right into him. Welcome, Anthony. You're with us, aren't you?
I'm here, yeah. Great to be with you.
You too. So I have invites for our upcoming Skywatch meeting, but I'm having trouble bringing that up right now. So I'll get to that at the end of the show. So Anthony, you and I met at the public hearings, and so I'm really happy to have you with me. So Anthony Tolda is a Republican candidate for U.S. Congress to represent my particular district, District 2, Congressional District 2 in New York. He ran for his seat in 2010 and made history as the first Constitution Party candidate to gain ballot access for a federal seat to represent New York State. For the 2012 election, he is running as a Republican and looking to secure the Constitution Party nomination, also because we have fusion voting here in New York State, and he can run with as many parties as he wishes to. One of the things I like about Anthony is that he is no stranger to the lies and cover-ups of 9/11. We haven't had extensive conversation about this, but I know you are aware in a lot of ways, and so I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that. But first, Anthony, I want to get into the geoengineering, where we met. First of all, how did you find out about those hearings? That was a question I've always wanted to ask you, because we had some publicity on it, but it was like really local. So how did you hear about the public hearings going on in Suffolk County?
Well, a supporter of mine and also a fellow Ron Paul supporter told me about it. And I remember hearing about it from another source too, but I forget what that other source was. But, that was a different Ron Paul supporter, actually. Yes, so two different Ron Paul supporters made me aware of it. And so
were they from Long Island? Long Island people?
Yeah. One of them was from District 1, which is a bit further out east than us, and the other one was she lives on the border of District 2 and 1. So this is an issue that I've known about for a while, and I felt like I just had to show up. I felt like how could I not show up, because I'm aware and I have somewhat of a public voice, so I felt the need to use it, and I showed up.
I'm very grateful you showed up. When did you become aware? I didn't become aware till about 2009. When I was doing my research, I was pretty blown away. I realized it was happening all around the world, and then I became alert enough to look at my own skies, and I saw it happening here too. When did you become aware that we have artificial man-made cloud cover hazing out the sun almost every day? When did you become aware of this?
I'm going to guess around 2003, 2004, because that was around the time I started driving trucks. Before I was a financial consultant, I was a truck driver, and I used to get sent out to the 5 boroughs a lot. And I would notice, as I was driving out, I used to work the night shifts, and I would drive out and notice that there was all these streaks in the sky that seemed to be just lingering and spreading, and it was very strange, very, very strange. And it's also pretty funny because, my personal beliefs, I was raised Christian, and I have Christian beliefs predominantly, but I've heard that the Hopi Indians said that in the in the end times there would be spider webs in the sky. And I don't necessarily believe that we're in the end times, but the way that they described the spider webs in the sky, I thought was pretty interesting. And that's, you know, for somebody that lived a culture that was prominent, you know, so long ago, to have that kind of a statement, and then to see what I've seen today, it seems pretty accurate as a statement for somebody that, you know, couldn't perceive what an airplane is and what these airplanes are doing, to say that there's spider webs in the sky. That's what it kind of looks like.
Yes, when it's all the X patterns, the grid patterns, it can look sort of web-like. And it's interesting you mentioned end times. I have my own take on that. I believe it means more of, you know, the end of times as we know it, the end of possibly, you know, our life socially, politically, as we know it. I don't think it means like end of the world, but I certainly do see huge change on the horizon. Well, and it's already here. These things are happening. So you became aware in 2003. Wow. That's even several...
I didn't specifically know what it was. I just knew that something wasn't right. And as time went on, I learned more and more about persistent jet contrails and became more aware. But just as a passive observer, I noticed that something was not right. And eventually, as time went on, I learned more and more. And, you know, leading us to a couple of months ago, that's what brought me out there, because I've noticed it for a long time now.
So you were there at the hearings, and was that amazing or what? The unity in the room was just palpable. The energy was it was such high-level energy. I mean, the community, every seat was full, packed, the whole house was packed. People were standing in the back of the room because they were waiting to speak to the legislature or just there in support of this. And I found it to be truly a magical day. This was the first time that I had ever been in the same space with that many people who know what is going on and who came prepared with facts, and their testimonies rocked. I mean, they came prepared. It was not much speculation going on coming from the testimonies. How did you feel about the testimonies that day?
I thought it was great. It was just really amazing to just see concerned citizens, and, you know, some of them had traveled a great distance to be there. And I remember there was one man from Connecticut and some other people from other areas that were far off of Long Island that had heard the news and, you know, felt so passionate about the issue that they felt the need to come out. And I thought that was just amazing.
I did too, yeah. We had grandmothers from Connecticut coming to speak on behalf of their grandchildren who lived in Suffolk County, who, you know, were not of age to be giving testimony. But this is the extent of it, folks. Geoengineering, weather modification is very real. It's been discussed. It has been discussed and is continuingly to be discussed at the top levels of our government, federal levels. The interesting thing is no members of Congress will touch this issue publicly. So
Dennis Kucinich, you know, he introduced a bill, and this has been a bill that's been in federal Congress more than once, from my best understanding. But
this is true. Let me correct you that, Anthony. What I mean is in regards to speaking with the public about it. We know that H.R. 2977 had the word chemtrails in it, put forth by Kucinich. I get you on that. What I'm saying is that when the public... if you recall, in the end of What in the World Are They Spraying, the filmmakers went to go speak to members of Congress about geoengineering, and none of them acknowledged. Some of them even just walked away and didn't even pay attention to them. Some of them waved them off, saying, leave a memo with my secretary, and the rest just didn't acknowledge its existence. So even though, right, we know they know about it because they've had 3 hearings between 2009 and 2010. As you said, they've put forth legislation regarding weather modification, weather mitigation, chemtrails. What do you feel about that? I'm really interested in your take on that, because you running for U.S. Congress, you'll be dealing with folks there who won't acknowledge it like you would be acknowledging it with me. It'd be very tough to get one of them on my show and have them even acknowledge that this is real, that they've been discussing it.
Well, there's a lot of issues that they're not acknowledging. It doesn't just stop there, and, you know, Ron Paul seems to be one of the few that's willing to get a little bit outside of the box, for, I guess, lack of a better term coming to mind. I saw a video of Ron Paul recently referring to global currency, and I was very proud of him for having the courage to come out and say that as a presidential candidate. And for someone that's a financial consultant and gets all this news day in and day out, because it's what I do and it's on the TV in front of me every day, it's pretty clear that there is an agenda for a global currency, and a dollar is being destroyed.
Yeah.
But Congress isn't discussing it. Why would they? It only says in the Constitution that they're responsible for our finances and that they're supposed to only have money coined in silver and gold.
Right. Well, interesting. Let's get into that then. Of course, you know my take on the money system. You've seen a little bit of my work.
Yes.
I know the fraudulent nature of it. How money comes into creation out of debt. It's something we cannot get out of under the Federal Reserve, fractional reserve, central banking system that we currently have. We will always perpetually remain in the position of the debtor, and the central bankers will always continuously remain in the position of creditor under this system. So I personally, I like Ron Paul's stance on ending the Fed and returning the power to coin, to create money, and giving that back to Congress, although I'm also for local communities doing that too. There's a lot of local communities like the Ithaca Hours, the Berkshires in Massachusetts, local currencies, no interest bearing on them. And the local communities are thriving. So just to throw that out there, get your take on that. And what are your ideas for the financial slavery that we're in?
Well, some of my ideas to fix the economy, believe it or not, I mean, a lot of people write off Occupy Wall Street, and there are some terrible, vile things that some of the individuals in that group have done, but there's also a lot of very intelligent individuals in that group, and it's unfortunate to see them painted with such broad strokes, but that's our media, and that seems to be what a lot of our mainstream culture falls into. But I went down there a couple of times to see what was going on and to see if there was any signs of intelligent life, and there was a sign there, Ducati Park or Liberty Square in New York City, as they call it. It said, "Restore the uptick rule, restore the Glass-Steagall Act," and a lot of people don't know what the uptick rule or what the Glass-Steagall Act is. And the uptick rule, the best example I could give, I guess, is when Lehman Brothers collapsed. The uptick rule had been repealed before that happened. So
how long before it happened was it repealed?
I don't remember the exact date. I honestly don't know, but I would guess it was somewhere either during the end of the Clinton or beginning of the Bush administration. So somewhere in that period of time.
Okay.
And what the uptick rule meant was that somebody couldn't short a stock, which means you're essentially borrowing the stock in order to sell it and then buy it back and make up the difference. You're betting on the stock going down. So what it meant was the uptick rule meant you couldn't short a stock until it ticked up, which meant for a brief moment in time there was more buyers than sellers. And the reason why it's so relevant is because if you have everybody continually, perpetually shorting a stock, and you have something like the Managed Funds Association.
Do me a favor, for us people not in the financial world, can you give me a more lay definition of what you mean when shorting a stock?
It's almost you're betting a company's going to decrease in value. You're betting against something as opposed to betting on something. So if you take the Managed Funds Association, which is essentially, in my opinion, and if anybody listens to Michael Savage, which I have mixed opinions on him, some of the things he says I love, some of the things I strongly disagree with, but he would describe the Managed Funds Association as a cabal, essentially led by George Soros, who has been responsible for destruction of Malaysia's currency, for a run on the banks in England in the 80s, and so they could theoretically take any stock at any time and just all bet against it in an effort to drive the stock down, and could possibly destroy the company and run them out of business. So without the uptick rule, a company like, say, Lehman Brothers was exposed to that kind of a vulnerability. And if somebody goes back and looks at the options, which is another way to bet against a company, there's a lot more risk taken by the investor, but it's another way to bet on a company. And they're basically betting that by a certain time, if you wanted to bet that 3 months from now a company would be worth half the value, you could do that depending on the company. So if you look historically at the options, there were these just insane bets being made by people that unless it connotates that unless you knew something, you'd be throwing away money to make that bet. So
sure, right. So you're talking about like inside information. These people having inside information before they place these huge bets.
If you look at historically, where the options were on Lehman Brothers, it connotates that there was a very high likelihood of some insider trading going on there. And without the uptick rule, it made it easier for Lehman Brothers to be a target. And once something like that happens once, we don't know. It could be, just to throw out an example, it could be Bank of America a year from now, or 6 months from now, or 3 months. We don't know because we don't have these safeguards in place. And overall, I'm a free market.
Let me interject 1 second, just because I really want to dissect this. So even if we have these rules in place that you're talking about, the fundamental basis of the monetary system is a fraud, right? To begin with. Our money has no real substance or value to it. So how do we then free ourselves economically and thrive economically when we're in the situation we're in? This is why Ron Paul's stance on, and I know you support a lot of his policy. I don't think all of it, but a lot of it, and that's, I believe, what he's talking about when he discusses the Federal Reserve and our monetary system. It's not something we can get out of under the current system. So where does this leave us then? And you're the new generation. I look at you as like the new generation of, people taking on these huge, issues that we're facing and working within the system that we have to do what you can. And I commend you for that. And I also and I also wonder as well, how far are you wanting and willing to go with this? Because I know at the basis of everything is fraud. Well, the central bankers run the United States government. Sure. So when you become congressmen, right, you'll be susceptible to lobbyists, waving tons of money in front of your face to sell this policy.
I won't be susceptible to it, but I will be subject to it, of course.
You're right. They'll be waving it in your face, and so I just want to send you strength and love, because I want you to remain true to your values and speak your truths, on your journey.
Thank you, and I will.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
At the core, basically, what I want regulations that have been historically proven to work. A lot of these regulations were put into place after the stock market crashed in the late 20s and throughout the Great Depression in the 30s. Some of these regulations were put into place and have served us well from that point up until now. So I want regulations that have been historically proven to protect us, and I want to get rid of the over-regulations that has prevented businesses from thriving. There's Peter Schiff. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Peter Schiff. He actually he ran for Senate in 2010 in Connecticut. His firm is not allowed to hire any more brokers than they already have on staff. If somebody quits or gets fired, the person can be replaced, but they're not allowed to expand past the employees they already have. So, government keeps claiming to create jobs, but in that case, due to overregulation, they're destroying jobs.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And so you're saying you think the best solution then, if I'm getting this correctly, is to stay in the current system we're in, the way it is, and just have more regulation? Is that? I
wouldn't say stay in the current system the way it is, no, but return to some things that have been tried and true for us. For example, another example being the Glass-Steagall Act. A lot of people don't know what the Glass-Steagall Act is, and what it did was it prevented commercial banks and investment banks from being united under the same business. So what happened was we had, with the housing crisis, for example, the housing market crash, there was all of these subprime loans, which were there was a lot more subprime loans given out throughout the Clinton and Bush administration to pump up the housing market, which inflated the bubble economy. And what Glass-Steagall did was it prevented these investment banks bundled up the subprime mortgage loans into bonds. And because the commercial banks were the ones that would rate those bonds, because they were married together where before they weren't, the investment houses would take these bonds that were essentially junk bonds, which means
aren't they all? They're all junk bonds, aren't they? They're all valueless.
Well, if you take a company, for example, because I don't really trust governments not to cook their books, especially if you're dealing with a government like China, which has been known to manipulate their books over and over and over again. Not to say that we don't do it either, but China's a little bit more blatant about it. If you take a company that's been well established and reports quarterly earnings and they're known to be reputable, that company might have a AAA bond, and it could very, very well be legitimate. But in the case of the housing crisis, we had these subprime mortgages, which were clearly junk bonds when bundled together. It was a junk investment, and because of the repealing of the Glass-Steagall Act, the investment houses would take these bonds to their commercial department, which is the same business, and they would say, you guys rate the bonds, and these are our bonds, and because we're together, we're telling you these are AAA bonds, and, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you're going to agree with us. And they did, and these subprime mortgage bonds were put out into the investment public all over the world as these AAA American mortgage bonds. And everybody, all over the world, and including in America, saw how well the housing market was doing. Said, oh, great, I'm going to buy these American AAA-rated mortgage bonds, and I'm not taking any risk, and I'm getting a smaller return on my principal, but my principal is protected. And a lot of these subprime mortgages, about 90%, were what's called adjustable rate mortgages, which means that the monthly payments, would have a potential to rise throughout the life of the mortgage. So as people began defaulting on the mortgages, then the people that were a little bit more stable above them, their adjustable rate went up, which made them more unstable. And then as those people defaulted, it was a snowball. So,
But it was by design. Like they knew they were selling bad loans. So this is all by design.
The institutions that rated these bonds, AAA, from somebody that's in the industry, I don't see how they could possibly claim ignorance. So that leaves only really one other option, that, there was some either, cavalier attitude of just not caring, or in some cases it's possibly premeditation. But to claim ignorance at the level these people were at in the industry is just, to me, a virtual impossibility. They could not have been ignorant of this.
So even if we were to re-implement, let's say, something like the Glass-Steagall Act, again, to me, this still doesn't solve the problem of never being able to get out of our debt. Right?
It's a puzzle. I mean, that's part of the puzzle.
It is part of the puzzle, I guess. But I'm wanting you to speak on to that a little bit. Again, like someone like Ron Paul, he would like to shut down the Fed and restore the money-making power to the Congress. Right. How do you feel about that stance?
Well, he wants to incrementally shut down the Fed, because to do it, overnight would more likely cause more harm than good.
Right.
So I agree with the idea of incrementally and as quickly as possible without causing greater harm than good. I do think getting rid of the Fed is a good idea, and you could use North Dakota as a great example of success with that, because North Dakota, they're the only state in the union to have their own sovereign state bank, and they were the only state to start the fiscal year of 2010 with a surplus as opposed to a deficit.
Is there interest attached to their... Say this again. Explain this a little more about North Dakota. What do you know about it?
Well, they have a bank that operates outside of the Federal Reserve banking system. So the Federal Reserve banking system has these sections, and the country is essentially divided up into slices. Okay? But North Dakota, they at least have the option of utilizing their sovereign state bank, and it's my opinion that part of what has helped them financially, and part of why they had a surplus as opposed to a deficit in 2010.
And they're using Federal Reserve notes?
Well, they still, yes, of course, they still carry and carry out transactions with the Federal Reserve notes, but they're not directly tied to the Federal Reserve System in the same manner. So that sovereignty has enabled them to structure their bank in a way that and help structure the state's finances in a way that has helped them be a bit more resilient to this financial crisis.
So they're able to use the currency, the Federal Reserve notes, but remain sovereign in regards to what exactly?
They're not as subject to the whims of the federal government as the rest of the banking system. A lot of these banks,
so the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction in a lot of ways, is what you're saying, over this state sovereign bank, and they're able to use the currency regardless.
I would say they have significantly less influence. And there was some banks that didn't even need the bailout money, and the government basically went to them and said, "You're taking this money." And and the idea was that all these banks were supposed to pump the whole system full of liquidity, which to a degree they've done, but also to a large degree the banks have hoarded the capital and used it just for their own gain. Well, because of the low interest rates, the artificially low interest rates, it doesn't even really make sense for the banks to lend, because they'd rather just keep it for themselves or keep it amongst themselves and collect interest amongst themselves and not be as wary of the ability of the debtor to pay if it's all institutional changing hands of the money.
Well, I'm really liking I'm going to do my own research more into the North Dakota State Sovereign Bank. I think that's very interesting. That's really where my head goes when I think about these things. I think about our sovereignty. I think about the debt that the children are being born into. You know, I have young children in my family, and they have thousands, tens of thousands of dollars attached to them in debt just by being born here. And so to me, this is just a fundamental issue that needs to be faced. And so the sovereignty, what you're speaking about right now, the sovereign state bank, is really interesting to me. Also, I'd like to get your take on the local currencies I mentioned before, where some communities are printing their own local currency interest-free, and they are used in the community just like you would use Federal Reserve notes, like our currency now. The local businesses use the currency. So these communities are thriving. They're doing really well as a result of this. What do you think about that?
I think it's brilliant. Vermont, I know part of Vermont has a timber-based currency, and from what I'm hearing, that's done very well from them. And also, we also have the option of bartering with each other, which is something that there's been a lot of in Montana. And from what I've heard, that it's been driving the feds nuts in a sense, because if people barter between each other, there's no way to track it, there's no way to tax it.
Sure, there's no way to control it, and yeah.
And a lot of people are believing that, the further and further we go on, that, paying taxes is becoming more and more of a moral hazard. So if you believe paying taxes is a moral hazard and, you want to eliminate the risk of, getting yourself in trouble, then maybe bartering is something that you should be incorporating more into your life and your transactions.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that's a whole nother, interesting sector that we could go off on, the income tax and how legit is it, and is there a law for it, and all of that. And that's a completely other conversation. But so you're saying that you think it's a good idea for people to explore something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, during the very early ages of mankind, the concept of currency didn't even exist, so people had no choice but to barter, because that was the only way to go about things, unless it was through force. So you got
right. It was an exchange, like I cut your hair, you cook me dinner, something like that. You fix my car, I'll do your bookkeeping for a couple weeks.
Well, by the time there was cars, we had currency, but for a modern day
I guess I'm thinking in terms of now, like what would that look like now?
Right, sure. I mean, people would just reasonably barter with each other, and where if you think two reasonable adults can come up with some kind of agreement of, okay, the value of my services and the value of your services, and this exchange is worth this, and come to some reasonable agreement. There's no reason why adults shouldn't be able to make those decisions for themselves.
Well, and there was a time where we were, and at some point things changed. Things changed.
It's happening. It's just not happening as much as I'd like to see it. And from what I understand, there's quite a bit of it in Montana. So I applaud them for that.
I do too. I think it's fabulous. It's something I'm interested in doing in my own community. Learning how to get that going. That's something I personally am doing more research on myself, because I think it's brilliant. To know that our money is literally, and this is not, I'm not speaking theoretically, it is literally valueless. The only thing that gives it value is our faith and belief in it, literally. So with that, we can really, it's up for grabs, knowing that, it's like, well, then we can do this ourselves. And I think that more and more folks are exploring that. And I think that's what the United We Strike Peace trains are about. It's about, don't buy, don't comply, peaceful non-compliance. And what the folks are doing around the country, those communities that are starting up their local currencies, are exactly in alignment with the premise of this weekend, which is to, and I always say this, it's like my motto, but, to unplug from the matrix in some ways. And I agree with you when you say we can't just shut down the Fed. It has to be incrementally. Likewise, with any transitions we're going to make out of the matrix, it's kind of like a baby step, We're really coming into ourselves in a whole new way, and it's like baby stepping into a new way of being that we're not used to. More reliance on ourselves and each other and our communities, and less reliance on the monopolies and the federal government, which is just out of control lately.
Sure.
Always has been, actually, but really throwing it into high gear lately with the drones now going to be spying on us, with the NDAA and the strip searching going on at the airports. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I actually I had an experience with the TSA recently where I didn't want to go through the body scanner, and fortunately I didn't have to go through a strip search. I wouldn't have gone through that. I would have just said I'm not flying. But I had to go through a pat-down, and it wasn't so bad, but it wasn't so great either. And I had happened to have a copy of my pocket constitution with me, and I went to grab for it in the bin, and the people at the TSA were freaking out. I don't know what they thought, but I said, no, it's okay, it's okay. I said, I just want to be able to look at the Constitution while you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights.
What they said? Did they say anything to you?
Oh, one guy actually nodded his head, and he said, yeah, Fourth Amendment rights. And I was surprised at that reaction from him, but hopefully he thinks about his job a little bit more, and maybe he finds something else to do with himself, because it really is a shame. And when I came to speak about the chemtrails, I made the point that we had an 85-year-old woman strip searched at JFK Airport sometime in early December or maybe late November. And I said that it's ridiculous that we could have the average law-abiding citizen, and an 85-year-old woman strip searched, but we have no idea who is flying these planes as part of this geoengineering program. And in a place like New York, if anybody should have if any citizens anywhere in the world have a little bit more of a weighted say about what goes on in their airspace, it ought to be people in the 5 boroughs and then surrounding areas such as Long Island.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that show. I just got reminded of something that nowadays, I know the federal government is updating a lot of their agencies to view people who support the Constitution, who speak out against the United Nations, who talk about sovereignty, who talk about the corruption and fraud of the Fed, that these people are to be deemed terrorists, that these people are to be deemed enemies of the state. So, the truth and reality is, me talking to you about the things I'm talking about, and even you, yourself in some ways, and everybody else this whole weekend, every single host on this whole peace train, we all put ourselves at a certain amount of risk just by talking about these things. And this is just the tyranny of it all, right? That you or I could be deemed a terrorist because you're supporting the Constitution. You say you want to be able to look at your Fourth Amendment right in the Constitution, and you know that, right? You're aware that the federal government sends brochures out. The FBI, for example, sends their brochures out to local police agencies, local police law enforcement, and actually trains them to believe that people who support the Constitution are terrorists.
Sure. Well, a very wise man once said, "For every action, there is an equal and relevant." Whenever I quote somebody, I always seem to mess up a word or two. But for every action, there's an equal and I know I'm not getting the word right, but relevant reaction. So, okay, for all of the propaganda that comes out from the federal government, to react to that, we have the Oath Keepers, and I'm a huge advocate for Oath Keepers, although they can't, as a group, advocate for candidates because they're not-for-profit and they're for educational purposes. But I'm a huge advocate of them, and I'm friendly with some people that are Oath Keepers, and they happen to support me as individuals, although the group can't endorse candidates. But there are individuals within the group that I'm friendly with that support me.
The Oath, you're saying the Oath Keepers?
Well, not as a group, but there's some individuals that I happen to be friendly with and happen to support my campaign. Although they can't officially do it in an Oath Keepers capacity, they're still allowed to support people as individuals. So there are some individuals in that group where we're mutually supportive of each other, but I'm supportive as the group as a whole, because as a candidate, I'm not limited to being able to support a group like that. So I advocate for them whenever and wherever possible.
I think that's fabulous, and that's another thing that gets me very excited. Any sort of law enforcement, any member of the military, anybody that is aware to these things going on very much excites me, because we're all in this together. We're not separate in this. We're all in this together. We're all under the same monetary system. We're all under the same shadow government, if you will. The international bankers basically running the show here in this country. So I get very excited about things like this. And I know that Sheriff Mack, I haven't followed up on this, but last month there was a conference of over 200 sheriffs from across the country who gathered together to learn about state sovereignty and to brush up on what their powers are. And one of them being that the sheriff has power over the federal government as far as the federal government enforcing laws within the sheriff's jurisdiction. And they can say yes or no to federal laws being enforced in their jurisdiction. And so this is really important for them to know about. So I get very excited, obviously, when I hear things like this going on. Oath Keepers as well.
And a lot of people, they might not know, but that the county sheriff, it's the only law enforcement position that on your county level is an elected position. So the people actually do vote for the county sheriffs. So if you're somebody that's, maybe retired or retired from the law enforcement or retired from the military, you might want to consider running for your local county sheriff. Or even if you're somebody that's a strict constitutionalist that feels capable to do the job, you might want to consider running for that.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, and if it's an off year in regards to it not being a year where there's presidential candidates, or not being a year where there's federal candidates on the ballot, that might be a year where your county sheriff is on the ballot, and that's something that hopefully knowing that might motivate more people to vote on a year where they might not normally vote, because it's certainly a position that we should be paying more attention to and learning about the candidates and making sure we elect the right people.
It is. It's I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm just not interested in politics. And my response to that is, well, politics is interested in you and has been running the underlinks of your life in a lot of ways that you're not aware of. And so it's not a matter of like who's interested in politics and who's not. Again, we're all in this together. These policies, the foreign policy of our nation, the money system of our nation, the leadership of our nation, all of that affects each and every one of us directly, including the children being born. Like I said before, they're born into nearly $40,000 in debt, probably more by now. Each family has.
I've seen some of my Facebook friends post there's a picture of a little girl with a sign, and it says that I only have a Barbie doll house and I'm $38,000 in debt.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that too. And as adorable and cute as that is, and she's a beautiful child, that's the reality of it. That's the stark reality of it.
And like you said, as cute as funny as it is, my heart weeps for her, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this. It's not just for us, but for future generations as well.
Yes. Well, I'm just thrilled to have you in my sphere of influence, and I'm so glad that you're able to, have a platform with me tonight. And I know you've had many platforms, but I'm just glad you're with me tonight, and that the rest of the world is able to hear what you have to say. So another topic for me that's always of interest, something that I'm always I can talk about for hours, is the term the New World Order. We've heard our politicians use it. We've heard Obama use it. We've heard the Bushes use it. We've heard Kissinger use it. We've heard other international politicians use it. And so this term has meaning to our leadership, right?
It's not a conspiracy theory where it's all over our mainstream politicians now, is it?
Exactly. When you can no longer deny it when you hear Bill Clinton or George Bush or Barack Obama use the term New World Order. It's coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak. It's not up for debate anymore. And I'm young, right? I'm 33. And so when I did my research on the New World Order, and the research I continue to do, but I found out that in the 1980s and the 1970s, people who were talking about the New World Order were demonized, and even though we still get a little bit of that today, but it's a lot harder today. You really can't. There's no debate, like I said. But back then, people would get just totally demonized, just for even mentioning it. The Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, they weren't even said to exist. There was denial of their existence. And now we're at a point in time, largely because of the internet, where they can't hide anymore. And it's a beautiful thing. So tell me what you think about the New World Order. And let me just say this one last piece before I go in. I always get a kick out of kind of dissecting things, and when we look at the back of our dollar bill, a lot of people know this, not everybody, but a lot of people know this, it translates to New World Order. But if you look at the words in a Latin dictionary, I'll give you just the exact meaning so everybody can get an idea of what the back of our money says. And so novus means new or extraordinary, ordo means order, seclorum means world or worldly affairs. So we're talking about a new, extraordinary order of worldly affairs. And then the bottom part says annuit coeptis. And annuit means to designate, declare, favor, or smile upon. And coeptis means to declare or to undertake or to begin or start. So they're talking about declaring and smiling upon their new undertaking of a new world order. What do you think that means? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with social engineering and control. So, all right, we're taught that there's not supposed to be any differences between men and women anymore, or there's not supposed to be any sovereign cultures anymore. It's just all supposed to be just this mishmash. Or if you've ever heard a term of a gray race, which is just a theory that one day there'll be so much interbreeding in humanity that there'll be no sovereign culture anymore. That everybody will look essentially the same as time goes on. And I think we should be embracing our differences. In regards to men and women, it's differences that attract men and women to each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, not everybody. I mean, of course, a certain percent of the population, chooses to have relations with the same sex, and that's their choice, and I don't seek to infringe on what people do in their bedrooms. But by the large, men and women, we're attracted to each other's differences. And I think that women should have all the same freedoms as men, but, for me to hold the door open for a woman, every once in a while, most of them are appreciative, but, once in a while you get one that, kind of looks at you funny, like, what are you doing,
It'd probably
buddy?
be me. I think I'm one of them. I'm kidding.
But I would hold the door open for a young woman or an older woman or a woman I found attractive or a woman I didn't find attractive. It's not, there's no angle there. It's just doing something that, I was brought up to believe is gentlemanly, and that's where it's coming from. It's just one of those little nuances that is being socially engineered out of our society. And what it's leading towards, it sounds like, it might sound to some people like I'm splitting hair, but what it's leading towards is the destruction of our sense of culture. And if you have no culture and somebody else is at the steering wheel, the New World Order is at the steering wheel, they're steering us collectively to behave how they feel we should behave.
Yes, I would definitely agree with you on that. It's a steering. It's creating a population that is very obedient, very unquestioning, very just blindly patriotic, and very deceived. Remains to be very deceived.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate. I don't know if you've ever read Brave New World, but Brave New World was essentially a book describing the future of the New World Order, and there's been some debate over if the author Aldous Huxley was on our side or not, and it's widely understood that his brother Julian Huxley was very much against us and very much aligned with the New World Order. Mm-hmm. But one of the speeches that I saw Aldous Huxley present was he said that it's scientifically verifiable that essentially 20% of a society is by and large uncontrollable. 20% is by and large controllable, and you have this 60% in the middle that, due to repetition at variable degrees, are controllable. So essentially, what I think needs to be done is the 20% of our society that's uncontrollable needs to do everything we can to be peaceful and put our differences aside and work together to try to help that middle 60% join with us in an effort to restore freedom and protect the freedoms that are left at the same time in our humanity. Because if we can't get past our petty differences, the implications and the consequences are pretty dire. And I've been around some Tea Party groups, and I've visited Occupy Wall Street, and like I said, with any group, you're going to have you're good, and you're going to have you're not so great, and sometimes you're downright bad. But we really need to. I see a lot of egos too, and I see a lot of good people being separated from each other and lessening the potential effect of a good cause by not being able to get past their own egos, and that's something that's more of a psychologically based social critique that I can't legislate that. All I could do is encourage people to try to be a little more respectful and a little less egotistical towards each other.
I would agree with you there, and I'll say it because I feel it has spiritual connotations too. I feel that we need to evolve. And I'm speaking for myself, too, and that is part of my personal work is I'm, constantly in the process of checking my ego, checking my stuff so that I don't spew it out onto everyone and not even myself. Just being really clear and authentic in who I am and working towards that at the personal level. And I feel in a way that at the collective we need to do that too. And so this is not only like a leap in at the social and political levels, this is sort of a leap in general, I feel, for our consciousness, for our freedom. We're at another critical point in time where we have some pretty heavy things facing us. And so we really do need to think about who we're going to be. And again, because, you know, I'm on this peace train, so I want to say it again. And this weekend is about don't buy, don't comply, ask why. And when people ask you why, if you have the conversation, you know, tell them a little bit about what you know. That's how it begins. Again, the public hearings in Suffolk County for geoengineering we made that happen. That didn't just happen, right? We happened to the legislature. They didn't happen to us. We went and made that happen.
And the ironic part is that a lot of Republicans will write that whole event off and say, oh, it's some kind of liberal global warming nonsense stuff. And it's really, actually, the bill was introduced by a Republican, and this geoengineering, it's actually part of that whole, phony global warming agenda. And, the same types of people that fudge the numbers and fudge the statistics on ClimateGate, which for anybody who doesn't know is an international fraud in regards to recording temperatures that was exposed by some people that hacked into some MIT records that were also linked to some schools over in England.
Wasn't the IPCC, or the International Panel on Climate Change, I believe sort of a UN spawn? Didn't they also cook the books, and they doctored their data to make it look like it was much more dire than it was? This came out in the public as public knowledge.
I think one of the methods or one of the terms they used was this hockey stick approach that they had, and that was their little code for how they were going to cook the books on it. But it's those same types of quack scientists that are just looking to either get grants or make a name or have a stable income for themselves. It's those same kind of scientists that you'll see if you do enough research on YouTube in regards to this persistent jet contrail/chemtrail issue. It's those same types of scientists. I wish I remembered the guy's name, but he was on, he was on YouTube, and he was addressing a group, and he was saying how they were going to spray between 10 and 20 million
tons of aluminum.
Yeah, of aluminum into the atmosphere in an effort to have the sun's rays bounce off of them and then go back out into space so that we wouldn't cook ourselves as a planet. Right. But then, these same trails that they're spraying are ripping holes in the ozone layer and actually creating the potential for global warming.
Absolutely.
Where it's not there right now. I mean, if it does warm, it's warming as part of a natural cycle. This planet has been warming and cooling regardless of human activity since the beginning of time. So that's why they've altered their approach. It's not even called global warming as much anymore. Now they're making a transition to climate change. Well, if we have the change of the seasons, you could say the natural progression of the seasons is climate change. They use arbitrary terms and semantics in an effort to just bamboozle that 20% that Aldous Huxley described as the manipulatable percentage of a society, and they do it in a matter of repetition, so then they can then bamboozle that middle 60% as much as they can get out of it, and then the 20% that's uncontrollable by the large is smart enough to not succumb to it in the first place.
Right. Well, we only have a few more minutes left, and it's interesting that you brought up Aldous Huxley, and I would like to just read a bit of a speech of his, just so people get an idea of what the New World Order means in a broad sense, because this is what we've been talking about for the past few minutes. And then I want to talk about moving beyond this, like literally moving beyond this, relying more on ourselves, each other, our communities. That's like a mantra for me. And that's really what we need to be doing, is moving beyond it, not fighting the system, but going beyond it. So in a speech given by Aldous Huxley, author of A Brave New World at UC Berkeley on March 20th, 1962, he says, quote, "Here I'd like to briefly compare the parable of A Brave New World with George Orwell's book 1984. The scientific dictatorships in the future will be nearer to the Brave New World pattern, because the Brave New World pattern is probably more efficient than the other if you can get the people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being. the nature of the ultimate revolution of which we are, excuse me, of which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in the process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy who have always existed and presumably will always exist to get people actually to love their servitude, where people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs by which any decent standards they ought not to enjoy. For example, he says the pharmacological methods. These methods are more refined than the old methods of terror because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance. The result would be, you can imagine, a euphoric, which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible. End quote. So this was in a speech given at UC Berkeley, and he was talking about what he calls the scientific dictatorships of the future. He wasn't talking about a fiction story. He was talking about from 1962 to now, what it's going to look like now, and we're smack in the middle of it, right? We have all sorts of genetic engineering going on. Well, it looks like we're done, guys. I just want to thank you, Anthony, for being with us.
It's great to be here.
And I'd love to have you on again. We'll check in with you in a few months, see how you're doing.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks so much. And everybody have a wonderful evening. This is Humanity Transcending for the 2012 Peace Train Marathons. Thank you and good night, everybody.
UWS Radio and the International Community Radio Network is a joint partnership in Internet Community Radio, working to give each country